In this video, I'm going to talk about deploying Azure Web Apps, talking about three different sections. In the first one, I'm going to start about deploying web application services from the Azure portal, where in the second one, I'm going to walk you through the deployment of Azure Web Apps out of Visual Studio. And in the third one, we'll be talking about publishing your web application content. Deploying an Azure web application from the portal is really easy. From the portal, you select a new resource, taking web applications as the resource type, and then you need to provide a unique web application name. By default, the domain name that's being used is always azurewebsites.net, but obviously, by using your public DNS CNAME alias integration, you can rename the websites to whatever name you want. A web app can be deployed in new ways within an existing Azure resource group or creating a new one, because in the end it's just another Azure resource. Once the settings are defined, we need to specify the application service plan as well as specifying the Azure region, and then optionally you can decide if you want to use application insights for additional website diagnostic and monitoring. If you're really interested in application insights, you'll find this in another video as part of this course, which was covered in section 2, the monitoring part. Now, besides using the portal, it's also possible to deploy an Azure web app directly from Visual Studio, for example. From within Visual Studio, you select to create a new project, opting in for the cloud option, and then selecting ASP.NET Web Application, where there's a small little flag, Host in the Cloud, as it's called, which means starting up the integration that the application Create Wizard will start up and pointing it directly to my Azure subscription, where again I have to provide a web application name, selecting my subscription, defining a new or reusing an existing resource group, as well as providing the application service plan. Once we have our web resource group available in Azure, it's obviously all about publishing web application content, where Azure applications give you a couple of different options. An interesting one is using FTP. By using an FTP client like FileZilla, or basically any other FTP client you're familiar with already, or even natively out of Visual Studio. Another approach, however, is using the Web Deploy Package tool again out of Visual Studio, or even using Command Line tool for using web deployment. So it's a bit depending on your source environment. You might already be familiar with Web Deploy Package approach out of IIS when you're deploying multiple websites to multiple web servers in your on-premises infrastructure. The third approach is integrating with source control and integrating with GitHub repository, like a local Git or Bitbucket, is another support example. Or even an easy one is using a cloud folder like Dropbox or even the Microsoft OneDrive that I'll show you later on in a demo how this is working. So I think with that it's about time to start another demo in which I'm going to deploy a new web application from the portal as well as from Visual Studio, and then showing you how easy it is to upload your content out of OneDrive. So let me start with opening up the Azure portal. From here I select a new resource, select web app and mobile, followed by selecting web applications. I provide a unique name, providing the name for the resource group and specifying the application service plan, where I can select an existing one or creating a new one. For this demo, let me start with a new one. Now, why do I want to create a new one? Because I want to show you the differences in the pricing tiers. As explained during the presentation itself, there are 5 different pricing tiers, where the presented ones here are Standard, Basic and Premium. From the View All option, I can have a look at all the different ones. Now, Standard, Basic and Premium, as you can see from this table, already shows you the differences. Since we're using Platform as a Service, you know that underneath it's still using infrastructure, where the performance for my application server is different between Standard, Basic and Premium. Next, there are also some dependencies, storage capacities, or the number of instances out of scalabilities that I'll talk about later on in the other section of this course, as well as the deployment slots and supporting Traffic Manager load balancing or not. For this one, let me start with the standard pricing tier. I confirm my selections, activating application insights, and creating my deployment job. So I'm going to give it some time, and at the same time I can start up my Visual Studio to do an additional demo showing you the deployment directly out of my Visual Studio environment. So from here I'm creating a new project, linking this one to ASP.NET, where the interesting aspect is, here I can select application insights as it's already recognizing my Azure subscription. So I'm going to confirm it and then deploying an MVC application, where here you can allocate that it needs to be hosted in Azure. I confirm my selections, where it will dynamically generate the web application name. Now obviously nothing blocks you from changing this name to something more meaningful to you, but I'm not going to do that as part of this deployment. I select my resource group that I could use, can reuse the one I already created in the portal, and again selecting a web application plan. From here my job gets created, which gives me some time to jump back to my portal and verifying that my previously deployed web app is already finished on this side. So I'm going to remove this bar a little bit. So my web application is being created, the plan service has been created, and I also flagged application insights. So from the portal it already worked fine. From Visual Studio it's still deploying, and as you can see in the Solution Explorer, it's really building up my ASP.NET application. Now from here I could publish it. So what I've done now is creating it locally, so it's now running locally on my development station. And from here I could push it out directly into Azure, forcing it to become a published website, or it will pick up the Visual Studio deployment job, and after a couple of minutes my website will be available as a live running website. Let me jump back to the portal, selecting my previously deployed web app from the portal creation, where I can show you that my website is actually available and up and running. So it provides me the URL and it tells me, hey, the website is live, successfully created. So the next part is uploading the content itself, which I'm not going to do in this demo. And here Visual Studio is still running, but as you see, my demo website on my local station will be exact to the application sites that's being published directly into Azure. This completes the first part of the section in which I walked you through the deployment of Azure Web Apps. In the next video, I'll talk a little bit more about different settings of Azure Web Apps and how to configure them.